The cold night air wrapped around the city like an invisible blanket. The streets lit by flickering neon signs and dim streetlights. It was one of those nights when people hurried home, eager to escape the biting wind. But for one man, there was no home to return to. Daniel sat on the sidewalk, his tattered jacket barely offering any warmth. His hands, rough and calloused, gripped a small cardboard sign with faded letters. Hungry, anything helps. Daniel had been living on the streets for years. Life hadn't always been this way. There was a time when he had dreams, ambitions, even a steady job. But one bad decision, a stroke of bad luck, and everything had crumbled. Now, all he had left was the loose change in his pocket and a $1 bill, the last piece of his survival. He had promised himself he wouldn't spend it unless he absolutely had to. As he sat there, watching people walk past him without a second glance, something unusual caught his eye. A well-dressed man stood by the curb, looking frustrated as he patted his pockets. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and polished shoes that probably cost more than Daniel had ever held in his hands, was speaking into his phone, his voice sharp with frustration. "Come on, not now," the man muttered. "I lost my wallet somewhere. I can't even pay for a cab." Daniel watched him for a moment. It was clear this man was rich. Probably the kind of person who never had to worry about money a day in his life. He could have walked away, ignored it, and let the man figure it out himself. After all, life had been cruel to Daniel. Why should he help someone who had everything? But then, something inside him stirred. Maybe it was kindness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just a need to feel like he still had something to give, no matter how little. Taking a deep breath, Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his last dollar, and held it out. "Hey," he called. "You need $1?" The man turned, surprised. His sharp, calculating eyes studied Daniel, as if trying to understand why someone who clearly had nothing would offer him something. He hesitated, but then with a small nod, he took the bill. "Thankin' you," the man said, almost cautiously. "I'll pay you back." Daniel just shrugged. "Don't worry about it." The man looked at him for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, before stepping into the waiting cab. And just like that, he was gone. Daniel sighed. That was it, his last dollar. Given away to a man who probably wouldn't even remember him by morning. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and leaned back against the cold concrete wall, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But what he didn't know was that the man in the suit wasn't just anyone. And that single act of kindness would change everything. The next morning, as Daniel sat on the same sidewalk, tired and hungry, a sleek black car pulled up in front of him. The tinted window rolled down, and to his shock, the same man from the night before was looking at him. Only this time he wasn't frustrated. He wasn't just passing through. He was here for Daniel. And what he said next would turn Daniel's world upside down. Daniel blinked, unsure if he was imagining things. The sleek black car, the suited man staring at him through the open window. It felt like a scene from a movie. He sat up straight, his heartbeat picking up. He had spent years being invisible, just another face in the crowd, but now someone had come back for him. Someone who had every reason to forget he even existed. The door clicked open. The man gestured toward the seat beside him. "Get in," he said. Daniel hesitated. He had been on the streets long enough to know that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But what did he have to lose? His life wasn't exactly overflowing with opportunities. With a deep breath, he climbed into the car, the warmth of the interior wrapping around him like a forgotten comfort. The man studied him for a moment before speaking. "My name is Richard Lawson," he said. "I own several businesses in this city." Daniel tried not to look too impressed. He had suspected the guy was wealthy, but several businesses. That was a different level. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Last night you gave me your last dollar. I know it was all you had." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't done it for recognition. If anything, he didn't want to be pitied. "It was just $1, he muttered. "Didn't seem right to leave you stranded." Richard smiled, but there was something deeper in his eyes, something calculating. "Most people wouldn't have done that," he said. "Especially not someone in your position." Daniel shrugged. "Guess I'm not most people." Richard let out a low chuckle. "No, you're not." He sat back, crossing one leg over the other. "Tell me, Daniel, what's your story?" The question caught him off guard. Most people never asked. They just assumed that he was a junkie, a criminal, a man who had messed up too many times to deserve another chance. Daniel looked down at his hands, as if the rough skin held all the answers. "I wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "I had a job, a place, a life." He exhaled slowly. "Then I made a bad investment. Thought I was doing something smart, but I lost everything. Couldn't pay rent, lost my apartment, lost my job. After that, it just got harder and harder to get back on my feet." Richard listened intently, nodding as if he understood. But how could he? A man like him had probably never known what it felt like to go hungry for days, or sleep on a sidewalk while the city moved on without him. "I see potential in you, Daniel," Richard said suddenly. Daniel frowned. Potential. Richard's gaze didn't waver. "I built my companies from the ground up. I've seen what it takes to succeed. And I know when someone has the right instincts." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "I don't even have $1 to my name. What kind of instincts do you think I have?" "The kind that put someone else before yourself," Richard said. "The kind that made you help a total stranger with no expectation of anything in return. That's rare." He paused for a moment. "I have a proposal for you." Daniel's stomach twisted. This was it, the catch. The moment where everything came crashing down. He should have known better than to think this was just an act of kindness. Richard leaned forward. "I want to offer you a job, but not just any job, a partnership." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had been expecting a handout, a small act of charity, but this, it didn't make sense. "A partnership," he repeated. "Why?" Richard's expression turned serious. "Because I trust my instincts, and they tell me you're worth investing in." Daniel shook his head, still struggling to process what was happening. "I don't get it. You don't even know me." Richard gave him a small smile. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to start from nothing, and I know talent when I see it." Silence filled the car. Daniel felt like he was standing on the edge of something huge, something he didn't quite understand yet. Was this real? Could he trust it? Richard seemed to sense his hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "But if you're willing to take a chance, meet me at my office tomorrow. No strings attached." He handed Daniel a business card with an address printed in bold letters. Daniel stared at it, his fingers tracing the edges. "Think about it," Richard said, and with that, the door unlocked. Daniel stepped out, his mind spinning. He watched as the car pulled away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with nothing but a card and 1,000 questions. Was this his second chance? Or was it just another? Cruel twist of fate. He had until tomorrow to decide. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. That night, Daniel barely slept. He lay on the cold pavement, staring at the business card in his hands, flipping it between his fingers as if it might disappear. It felt unreal, too good to be true. A man like Richard Lawson didn't just hand out partnerships to guys sleeping on the streets. What if it was a joke, a test, or worse? What if it was real and he messed it all up? By morning, his stomach ached from hunger, but his mind was made up. He had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath, he made his way to the address on the card, a towering glass building that seemed a world away from where he had spent the night. Security eyed him suspiciously as he stepped inside, but when he gave them his name, they simply nodded and led him upstairs. The office was even more intimidating, sleek, modern, filled with people in crisp suits, moving with purpose. Daniel felt completely out of place. Then a door opened and Richard stepped out. "You actually came," Richard said with a knowing smile. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets. "Figured I'd at least hear you out." Richard gestured for him to follow, leading him into a spacious office with a breathtaking view of the city. He sat down, folded his hands on the desk, and got straight to the point. "I'm starting a new company," Richard said. "I want you to help me run it." Daniel stared at him. "You're serious?" Richard nodded. "You may not have business experience, but you have something more important. Perspective. You understand struggle. You know what it's like to lose everything and keep going. That's something money can't buy." Daniel swallowed hard. "But why me?" Richard leaned back. "Because I see something in you that reminds me of myself when I started. I had nothing once. No connections, no wealth, just determination and the willingness to take a chance. Someone gave me an opportunity when I didn't deserve it, and it changed my life. Now, I'm doing the same for you." Daniel felt his heart pound. He wanted to believe this was real, but self-doubt clung to him like a shadow. "What if I fail?" Richard smiled. "Then you learn, and then you try again." Something inside Daniel shifted. He had spent years believing he was stuck, that no one would ever give him a second chance. And now, someone was offering him not just a job, but a new life. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said. "I'm in." Richard extended his hand. Daniel hesitated for just a moment before shaking it, and just like that, everything changed. The next few months were a whirlwind. Daniel worked harder than he ever had, learning the ins and outs of business from the ground up. There were challenges, moments where he doubted himself, where old fears crept in. But Richard never wavered. He pushed Daniel, mentored him, and, slowly, Daniel began to see himself in a new light. Their company took off faster than either of them expected. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating opportunities for people like Daniel, those who had been written off by the world. They hired people who had been homeless, former convicts trying to rebuild, and those who just needed one chance to prove themselves. One night, months after that first meeting, Daniel stood on the rooftop of their office building, looking out over the city, the same city where he had once been invisible. Now he was part of something bigger. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was not living. Richard walked up beside him, hands in his pockets. "Not bad, huh?" Daniel let out a small laugh. "Not bad at all." Richard glanced at him. "Regret giving me that last $1?" Daniel shook his head. "Best investment I ever made." And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it.